The room was almost completely dark, just the blue-white glow of 16 security monitors and the man standing in front of them. He had not moved in 2 minutes, not one muscle, not one audible breath. The men who worked for Kang Jun understood his stillness the way experienced sailors understand a particular quality of silence before a storm. It meant something was being processed behind those cold eyes. It meant the room you were standing in was about to become a very different room. But tonight was different. Tonight the stillness was not calculating. It was something else entirely. Something that the man standing 3 feet behind him had never seen on his boss in 15 years of watching. Tonight Kang Jun looked frozen. Min-ho stood very still himself, watching the back of the man he had followed into every dark place this life had required, and he felt something he could not name shift in the air between them. On the center screen, she was dancing. The compound's medical wing. Late at night, every corridor camera on the overnight maintenance schedule that was supposed to take everything offline, almost everything. One feed was still live. She had no way of knowing that. She had no way of knowing that anyone could see her. And that was the point. She was not performing. She was not even fully present in the building anymore, not in the way people are present when they know they might be observed. She was somewhere else entirely. Her body moved the way bodies only move when the last wall is completely down. Raw, joyful, unguarded. Like someone who had been holding herself together so tightly for so long that this stolen corridor at midnight was the only place on earth where she was truly free. Kang Jun had not laughed in 31 days. His men counted. They did not say it aloud, but they counted, because the absence of that sound had become its own kind of weather inside the compound, cold, still, pressurized, the kind of pressure that has not yet decided where it will land. 31 days of absolute nothing, and now this. Min-ho cleared his throat, quietly, just enough. Kang Jun did not turn around. "She doesn't know we can see her," Min-ho said. It was not a question. It was not a warning. It was the only sentence that was safe to construct in that particular moment. 3 more seconds of silence. Then Kang Jun pressed his right hand flat against the monitor screen, fingers spread, palm down, the way you press your hand against glass to confirm that what you are seeing is real. He said 3 words that Min-ho had been waiting, without knowing he was waiting, to hear for 31 days. And by morning, nothing in that compound would be the same. 3 words. Don't turn it off. That was what Kang Jun said to the empty monitoring room, to Min-ho's retreating presence, to no one in particular, with his hand pressed against the glass of that screen, and 31 days of absolute silence running through him like current through still water. 3 words that told Min-ho, without a single additional syllable, that whatever was happening inside his boss at this exact instant was not something Kang Jun intended to examine in anyone's company, including his. Min-ho understood. He always understood. He pulled the door closed behind him with the practiced gentleness of a man who had spent 15 years learning the exact pressure required to make no sound at all. He stood in the corridor outside with his back against the wall and thought about 31 days. Before I take you back to where all of this actually began, I want you to do one thing for me. Drop your location in the comments right now. Just your city, your state, wherever in the world you are watching this tonight. I want to know where this story reached you. Now back to 31 days, and what they did to a man who was not supposed to be reachable by anything. The compound occupied the elevated north district of the city, the way a very old, very powerful institution occupies its ground, without apology, without decoration, and without any visible acknowledgement that the world outside its walls had opinions about it. 12 stories. Steel-reinforced concrete built to specifications that were filed under a holding company name that connected to nothing traceable. Surveillance architecture woven into the structure itself so naturally that a casual observer would find nothing to remark on. From the outside, it presented as a private headquarters, a wealthy man's operational center, which was exactly what it was. The additional details did not appear in any public document anywhere. Inside, in the 31 days leading up to the night in the monitoring room, the compound had developed an atmosphere that its inhabitants registered physically before their minds found language for it. Quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that moves through a space and rewires the behavior of every person inside it. Men who had operated their entire professional lives in volatile, dangerous environments were moving through those corridors with the energy of people who had made an unspoken collective decision not to be the thing that made the wrong sound. Conversations happened in shorter sentences, doors opened and closed with unusual care. Even the external security rotation spoke in a lower register than the outdoor space required. They all knew what had happened. None of them named it. Yeon. She had been 26 years old. She had been the last living person who could look at her brother with eyes that saw a person rather than a position. She had called him by his name without the weight attached to it. Since they were children together, she had been the only living proof that somewhere inside the architecture of the man Kang Jun had chosen to become, something warm was still being deliberately maintained. She had collapsed at 11:47 on a Tuesday evening. The message reached Kang Jun at 12:24. 37 minutes. No one questioned the delay. Messages traveled through layers of personnel in a large organization. Timing was imperfect. These things happened. By the time the medical response was authorized and deployed, the window for the simplest intervention had closed. She was gone by 3 in the morning. Kang Jun sat with her through the final hour without speaking. When it was over, he stood, straightened his jacket, gave Minho 3 operational directives in the hallway, in the voice of absolute professional regularity, walked to his office, and did not come out for 18 hours. When he emerged, the silence had settled over him so completely it might have always been there. His men had always feared him, but these 31 days produced a different kind of fear. Power has a logic to it. You can map its edges and navigate around them and build a functional working relationship with its predictable geometry. This silence had no geometry. It was simply present everywhere inside the compound, the way certain temperatures inhabit a space, not just felt on the surface, but occupying the air itself. Seon Woo had been watching. He was not a man who expressed himself loudly. That was a characteristic of amateurs, in his professional estimation. Loud men were visible. Visible men were manageable. Seon Woo had spent a decade operating from the exact periphery of every room that mattered, close enough to absorb every conversation worth absorbing, far enough from the center to maintain plausible strategic distance from whatever the center produced. He had attended Yeon's private funeral with appropriate solemnity. He had placed his hand on Kang Jun's arm in the corridor afterward and offered the correct words in the correct quiet register. He had watched Kang Jun receive those words with absolute nothing and had filed that nothing in the section of his mind reserved for the most operationally significant intelligence he possessed. A boss who could not be reached emotionally was not an advantage, not for Seon Woo's particular long-term purpose. A man who could not be moved could not be steered. Seon Woo needed a lever. He had been patient. He had been extraordinarily, almost artistically patient. And then there was the doctor. I need to pause here for just one moment, because there is something about the way a dangerous man pays attention to a woman that tells you everything about his actual condition. And I want to ask you this. Do you think Kang Jun himself understood why he kept returning to that camera feed? Or do you think he was telling himself something professional? Drop your thoughts in the comments right now, because what happens next changes the answer. Dr. Lena Cole had arrived at the compound 6 weeks ago through 3 layers of security protocol and background screening that consumed the standard vetting period plus 4 additional days. Her credentials were impeccable. Her discretion was documented by 3 previous high-profile private clients whose names appeared in no public record. She had accepted the compound contract at a fee that suggested genuine financial need without the desperation that would have made her unreliable, which was precisely the tone the compound's administrative structure preferred. She had walked in on the 4th of the month with her medical bag, her portable diagnostic kit, her pressed white coat, and the internal architecture of a woman who had decided a long time ago that professional precision was the wall between herself and everything this environment represented. She was exceptional at her job. Within the first week, 3 of Kang Jun's senior personnel had requested appointments that were not medically urgent, but were emotionally honest. The kind of appointments people make when they are living under sustained pressure and someone competent and discreet has become available. She treated what needed treating. She asked no questions outside the scope of treatment. She maintained the containment that was her most valuable professional quality inside this world. She had not yet had a direct medical appointment with Kang Jun himself, but somebody had been paying attention since the day she arrived. Kang Jun had reviewed her vetting file the day she arrived. Standard protocol. He had read it in 4 minutes, which was approximately 3 minutes and 40 seconds longer than he typically spent on contract personnel files. He had noted 3 specific things: the license suspension and the full public reinstatement with a statement of vindication, the name of the family whose attempted destruction of her career she had survived without capitulating, and the paragraph describing how she had responded to 18 months of professional ruin. She had kept working, reduced circumstances, small positions, charity clinic work, anything that kept her skills in practice. She had not stopped for a single day. He closed the file and returned to operational matters. 3 days later, he reviewed it again. That was 38 days ago. The compound's internal system maintained a passive log of all monitor review activity, not a log anyone checked regularly, but a log that existed. Kang Jun had accessed the medical wing camera feed 11 times in 6 weeks. Min-ho had discovered this not through any surveillance of his boss, which would have been both disloyal and professionally inadvisable, but because on the 8th occasion he had entered the monitoring room without announcement and found Kang Jun standing at the medical wing feed with a quality of stillness that was different from his operational default, just different enough. Min-ho had retreated without announcement, filed it in the already crowded internal space where he kept the things he knew but did not say, and said nothing. Seon Woo had his own intelligence sources, not people, systems. Small algorithmic monitoring threads woven into the compound's digital infrastructure across 3 years of patient preparation, designed specifically to surface the kind of detail that the compound's own internal security protocols were not configured to flag as significant. He looked at the access log on a Thursday afternoon. 11 entries, 6 weeks. Medical wing camera 3. He read it twice. Then he allowed himself, very briefly, the particular warmth of a feeling he did not indulge often. Not happiness, something colder than happiness, something more useful. He had found his lever. He simply needed to understand its exact geometry before he applied any pressure to it. The compound held its silence. The men moved carefully through their careful days. Seon Woo calculated in his private office with the patience that had always been his most dangerous quality. And at the end of the East Corridor in the medical wing, a doctor went about her work with the focused precision of a woman who had made an honest peace with the particular world she was currently occupying. She did not know that the most powerful man in that world had been watching her, quietly and privately and without explanation to anyone including himself, for 38 days. The dancing had not happened yet, but the watching already had. What nobody in that compound fully understood yet. Not Min-ho with his quiet observations, not Seon Woo with his access logs and patience, not Lena herself who went about her evenings in that medical wing with the freedom of someone who believed she was unwatched, was that what had been growing in that building for 38 days was not a situation that had started at any definable moment. It had started long before the dancing. The dancing was just when it became visible, and the watching had started because the silence of 31 days had not been, as everyone inside those walls had assumed, a man shutting down. It had been a man who had lost the one person who proved he was still alive, trying to find, without admitting to himself that he was looking, some evidence that the world still contained something that could reach him. He had not expected to find it here. He had not expected to find it in her. 3 days after the night in the monitoring room, Lena began her morning the way she began every morning inside that compound. Early, methodical. The medical wing spotless before any patient arrived, her files reviewed, her equipment checked. She had a system, and she kept to it because systems were what she had built her professional survival on after the 18 months that had tried to take everything from her. A system was the difference between a life and the wreckage of one. She opened the supply cabinet at 7:43 for a standard inventory check and stopped. On the second shelf, beside her preferred diagnostic instruments, was a sealed box she had not ordered and had not been expecting. She opened it. Inside, a portable blood pressure monitor of a specific make she had mentioned once, in a casual comment to no one in particular during a supply review 3 weeks earlier. Not a comment she had filed as a request, not something she had written down anywhere. Just a sentence, a professional observation that had not been addressed, she had assumed, because nobody had been listening. Somebody had been listening. She stood there holding the box for a moment longer than was professionally necessary. Then she set it on the shelf, made a note in her inventory log, and returned to her files. She told herself it was standard compound management, efficient logistics. She had been contracted as a professional, and they were maintaining her professional environment. That was the rational explanation, and it was probably the correct one. She moved on. But 3 days after that, the particular tea she drank in the afternoon, a specific blend not carried in the compound's general supply inventory that she had brought in her own bag and that had run out 4 days ago, appeared in the small kitchen adjacent to the medical wing. 2 boxes, sealed, correct brand, not something available in any standard compound procurement catalog she had ever reviewed. She stood in that small kitchen holding one of the boxes and felt something she had not felt in a long time inside any professional environment. Seen. She did not ask where it came from. She was not certain she wanted the answer to that question because she already suspected the answer, and suspecting something and confirming it were 2 different states of knowledge that required 2 different internal management systems. She made her tea. She drank it standing at the kitchen window, looking at the compound's internal courtyard. She was composed. She was professional. She was, if she was being completely honest with herself, in the way she sometimes allowed herself to be when she was absolutely alone, unsettled in a way that had nothing to do with threat and everything to do with something she had no reliable language for. Diana appeared in the doorway. She was the compound's nursing staff and the only person inside these walls that Lena had allowed past the professional perimeter she maintained. Not by deliberate choice exactly. Diana had simply not left enough space between her presence and Lena's for the perimeter to reassert itself, and after 3 weeks of working side by side, Lena had quietly stopped trying to maintain it. Diana looked at the tea, then at Lena, then back at the tea. She said nothing. She crossed to the kettle, made her own cup of something entirely different, and leaned against the counter. "New supply order come in?" she asked. "Apparently," Lena said. Diana nodded, drank her tea. "Good compound management," she said, with a tone of voice that meant absolutely none of those words in that sequence. Lena did not respond. She looked at the courtyard. Diana looked at her coffee cup. There was something happening that Diana had been tracking with the quiet, patient attention she applied to all things worth paying attention to. It was not dramatic. It did not announce itself. It was simply that, in the 2 days since the night Lena had danced in the corridor, which Diana knew about because she made it her business to gently know about most things that happened in her immediate professional environment, a very specific quality of Lena's professional composure had developed a hairline stress fracture that was not visible from most angles. Diana was standing at most angles. She watched Lena at the window, and she thought about the particular way powerful men tried to communicate care without communicating need, and she thought about the particular way strong women tried to receive that care without acknowledging receipt of it. She smiled at her coffee cup. She did not look up. Lena finished her tea, set the mug on the counter, picked up her files, put her coat straight. "I have the Choi appointment at 10, she said. "I know," Diana said, still not looking up from her mug. Lena left the kitchen. Diana listened to her footsteps return to the professional rhythm she always maintained in the corridors. Then Diana looked up, looked at the 2 boxes of specialty tea on the counter, and smiled again. A different smile this time. The kind that surfaces when you are watching 2 people try to be sensible about something that is not going to let them be sensible about it. She finished her coffee. She went back to work. She did not say another word about the tea. She did not need to. What Lena was not saying to herself, in the very clear and organized interior language she used to manage the information her professional life required her to process, was this. Twice in the past week, at the specific moments when she had thought about the tea and the equipment, her mind had gone immediately and without her permission to Kang Jun, not to a general administrative authority, not to a vague compound management process, to him specifically, and then she had redirected that thought with the firm professional efficiency that had kept her functioning inside this world. The redirection was getting slightly slower each time. She was aware of this. She was not, at this point, prepared to do anything about it. The first direct medical appointment with Kang Jun was scheduled for that Thursday. Standard protocol for all primary compound personnel. Annual review. Lena had been aware of it on the calendar for 2 weeks and had prepared for it the way she prepared for all high-stakes professional interactions, methodically, without excess, with a particular kind of internal steadiness that she had spent years building. It was a medical appointment. It would be professional. It would be brief. She was good at her job. This was her job. He arrived 3 minutes early. He answered every clinical question with complete accuracy and minimal elaboration. Blood pressure within normal range. Sleep irregular but functional. No current injuries. No presenting symptoms. He submitted to the examination with the same cooperative efficiency he brought to operational briefings. Clean, precise, closed, until the very end. She was making a note in her records when he said, without looking at her, "The portable monitor. Is it the correct specification?" She stopped writing. She looked up. He was looking at the wall directly ahead of him with the same expression he had worn for the entire appointment. Flat, controlled. Absolutely nothing moving on the surface. "Yes," she said. "It's exactly the right specification." A pause. "Thank you." He nodded once. "The way you acknowledge receipt of a document." Then he stood, adjusted his jacket, and left. Lena sat in the examination room for approximately 45 seconds after the door closed. Then she wrote 2 more words in her patient notes, put her pen down, and looked at the wall. The appointments that followed over the next 10 days had the same structure on paper: clinical, appropriate, documented, appropriate in every technical dimension. But within that structure, something had shifted by approximately 1 degree in each direction, and 1 degree is invisible until it accumulates. He started asking questions that were not about his health, not personal questions, nothing that could be identified as crossing a professional line, but questions that were not medical, questions that suggested he had read something, thought about something, a question about a specific diagnostic method she had mentioned in passing, a question about her previous work that could only have come from someone who had reviewed a document most people did not read carefully enough to extract that detail from. She answered each question with professional composure. She asked him only clinical questions in return. Their conversations were entirely appropriate, and every time he left, the room felt slightly different than it had before he arrived. On the 11th day, she was reviewing supply logs when the door of the medical wing opened at a time that was not on her appointment schedule. She looked up. Seon Woo stood in the doorway. She had seen him in the compound. She knew his name and his position. He had never appeared in the medical wing outside a scheduled appointment. He was smiling in the way that certain people smile when they have arranged for the conversation to already be completed before you know it has started. "Doctor," he said, "a moment, if you have one." She did not have one. She indicated that she did. He closed the door behind him. He sat down in the patient chair without being invited to do so. He placed a slim document folder on the desk between them and pushed it toward her. His expression did not change. It never fully changed. "I thought," he said, "in the interests of your professional safety, you should understand the full nature of your current contractual environment." She looked at the folder. She did not touch it yet. "The nature of your employment here," he continued, "involves some dimensions that the standard contract does not fully describe. Specifically, the degree of personal attention that your direct employer has been directing toward the medical wing." He paused. He was watching her face with the focused attention of someone who had made a study of other people's reactions. "I show you this," he said, "because someone in your position benefits from understanding when they have become significant in ways that were not agreed upon at the time of contract." I need you to pause for 1 second, because if you are feeling what I think you are feeling right now watching Seon Woo sit in that chair and frame the one person who has protected Lena as the threat, then I want to see it in the comments. Tell me what you want to happen to Seon Woo right now, because the audacity of what he just did is about to get significantly worse before it gets better. Lena looked at the documents. She was good at reading documents. She had spent years reading complex documents under pressure in circumstances where the reading mattered enormously. She read through the first 3 pages with the composure that was her most reliable professional quality. The documents showed security access logs, medical wing camera access records, 11 entries, 6 weeks. The pages were formatted to present this information as evidence of something concerning, of a surveillance pattern, of personal attention that had not been disclosed. Seon Woo had arranged the presentation with care. He had chosen what to include and what to omit with the practiced selection of someone who understood that documents do not lie, but the framing of documents lies constantly. She closed the folder. She looked at Seon Woo. "I appreciate you bringing this to my attention," she said. It was the correct professional response. It committed to nothing. It closed the conversation with appropriate courtesy. Seon Woo had expected it. He stood. He retrieved the folder from her desk. He left. The door closed. Lena sat in the quiet of the medical wing and let 10 seconds pass. Then she pulled open her desk drawer, took out the copy she'd made by photographing each page with her phone during the 30 seconds she had been reviewing the documents, and began to read everything she had seen again, carefully, without the frame Seon Woo had provided. The first read had been emotional management. The second read was investigation. She found it on the 4th page. Not something Seon Woo had highlighted, not something arranged near the front of the folder in the curated presentation he had assembled. A secondary document attached at the back of the access records, a brief internal administrative order, 8 lines, dated 5 weeks ago. The week after she had arrived, she read it once, then she read it again. Then she set her phone down on the desk and looked at the wall. The document was an order. An internal security directive addressed to 2 specific operational personnel, dated 5 weeks ago, the week she arrived, and what it directed, in the clean operational language that Kang Jun's organization used for such things, was this: a threat action that had been commissioned against Lena Cole by a rival faction, a faction that had decided her arrival as medical personnel was an intelligence risk, was to be neutralized immediately. The 2 personnel were to stand down from their monitoring position. No further action was to be taken against the contract physician. The matter was closed. Signed with a single character, an initial she recognized. She sat with that for a long time. A rival faction had identified her as a risk in her first week. They had moved against her. She had not known. She had walked through those first days with her professional composure and her system and her careful wall between herself and this world, completely unaware that two people had been positioned to act against her and had been stood down before she could know she was in danger. Stood down by the same man whose camera access logs Seon Woo had arranged as evidence of threat. Seon Woo had shown her documentation of Kang Jun watching her and framed it as danger. What the same documentation actually contained, when read in full, was evidence that Kang Jun had protected her before she was anything to him at all, before she had treated him once, before she had spoken to him about anything outside a supply inventory note. In the first week of her contract, when she was simply the new physician who had arrived on the 4th of the month, he had identified a threat against her, neutralized it, and told no one. Not her, not his own security team, no one. She thought about the tea, the equipment, the questions that were not about his health. The camera access logs, 11 entries across 6 weeks that Seon Woo had presented as a record of surveillance and that she was now understanding as something considerably more complicated than surveillance. She thought about 31 days of silence and a man who had lost his sister and had chosen to respond to that loss by becoming unreachable. And she thought about the fact that in the same 31 days, while every person in this compound had been careful and quiet and afraid of the stillness settling over their boss, the same man had been ensuring the specific tea blend of his contracted physician was available in the kitchen adjacent to the medical wing. The entire first half of this story had just changed shape. She could not unknow this. She stood in the corridor for another moment. Then she went back to the medical wing. She made tea. She sat at her desk. She thought about the geometry of the situation, which had just reconfigured so completely that the old map was no longer useful. And she thought about what a person does when the information they have been given as a warning turns out to be, on close reading, a different kind of message entirely. Seon Woo had wanted her afraid. She was not afraid. She was something else entirely, and she was still in the process of finding out what that something was. Diana was in the break room when Lena came in. She watched Lena make tea. She watched Lena sit down across from her. She watched Lena hold the mug and look at the table. She said nothing. She waited. Eventually, Lena looked up. "Do you ever," Lena said, "read a document and realize it means the complete opposite of what you were told it means?" Diana looked at her coffee mug, looked at Lena, looked at the coffee mug again. "Regularly," she said. "In this building. Absolutely regularly." The next medical appointment was different from every appointment before it. Not on the surface. On the surface, it was clinical, professional, documented, appropriate in every technical dimension. But Lena had entered that examination room carrying different information than she had carried before, and the way she held information had always been visible in the way she held herself, if you were looking carefully enough. Kang Jun was, as it turned out, someone who looked carefully. She completed the clinical assessment. She noted his readings. She made her documentation. And then, at the end, before she closed the file, she said without turning fully toward him, "The medical equipment, the supply update last week, that was a specific request, wasn't it?" It was not entirely a question. 3 seconds of silence. "It was a standard compound management directive," he said. She turned, looked at him. His expression had not changed. Flat, controlled, absolutely composed. "Of course," she said. Something shifted in his eyes. 1 degree. 1 fraction of 1 degree. Anyone who had not spent hours in the same room as this man would have missed it entirely. "Is the equipment functional?" he asked. "Perfectly," she said. He nodded, stood, adjusted his jacket. "Good," he said, and left. The appointments continued. Each one was the same on paper. Each one was different in practice. He began to arrive at the exact scheduled time rather than early or late, which Lena read correctly as a form of consideration. He stopped performing the complete professional disengagement he had maintained in the first appointment. He asked questions that were adjacent to personal without crossing any professional line. She answered them with the same adjacent quality, inside the same professional perimeter. They were very careful. They were also, as Diana observed from the safe distance of a corridor on 3 separate occasions, increasingly terrible at pretending. Min-ho had his own quiet data points. He noted the 3 occasions Kang Jun had reviewed operational files on his desk and then set them aside untouched. He noted the 2 evenings the monitoring room was accessed and the medical wing feed was not the only active screen. He noted the morning his boss had walked the long way through the compound, passing the east corridor that ran adjacent to the medical wing, in a route that was not the most efficient path to any operational destination. He noted all of these things. He said nothing about any of them. He waited with the particular patience of a man who has been waiting for exactly this and is not going to do anything that might interrupt it. Seon Woo had watched Lena leave the medical wing 3 days after his visit with the same composed professional stride she always maintained. He had watched and known with the particular intelligence of someone who pays absolute attention to other people's surfaces that the response had not been fear. She had not requested a contract renegotiation. She had not increased her visible professional distance from Kang Jun. She had simply continued with that unbothered professional competence, as if the conversation in the medical wing had been entirely unremarkable, which told him that his framing had failed. She had read the documents more carefully than he had expected. He had underestimated her. That was a mistake he made rarely and corrected quickly. He changed his strategy. He made a call that evening to a number that connected to an organization that was not affiliated with the compound. A simple arrangement. Clean. Deniable. The kind of arrangement that only requires one conversation if the conversation is conducted precisely. He did not know, as he made that call, that a conversation of a completely different kind was happening 2 floors below him. Kang Jun had come without an appointment, no injury, no health concern he had named. He simply appeared in the doorway of the medical wing at 7:15 in the evening and said, "Is this a bad time?" It was not a question with a very wide range of possible answers, given who was asking it. But Lena had looked at him standing in that doorway, in his black suit with the top button open, with the city dark outside and the compound settling into its evening quiet, and she had said, "No, it's not." He sat down, and they talked. Not about his health, not about supply orders or compound management or any of the professional topics that had contained their interactions until now. He told her something she did not expect. A detail from before the compound, before the organization, before any of what he had become. A small story from a long time ago. The kind of story you only tell someone when you have decided, without announcing the decision, to show them the thing underneath the surface. She told him something in return, about the 18 months, not the version she told professionally, the clean reinstatement narrative, the real version. The part about the morning she sat in her car in the parking garage of the hospital that had suspended her and could not open the door for 20 minutes. When he left, 40 minutes later, Lena stood in the middle of the medical wing and breathed. It felt like something. It felt like the beginning of something real. It felt, if she was being absolutely honest with herself in the way she sometimes allowed herself to be, like the wall she had maintained so carefully and for so long had a door in it now, and the door was open, and the air coming through it was nothing she had prepared herself for. She stood there in the warmth of it. She did not know that 2 floors above her, a phone call had already been completed. She did not know what Seon Woo had set in motion. She did not know that the warmest moment of the past 6 weeks was also its last. Diana saw Lena return to the main corridor. She looked at her. Lena looked back. Something passed between them in the silence that required no words and received none. Diana turned back to her clipboard, looked down at it, and smiled. Outside the compound, a car was already moving. She was taken at 9:53 in the evening, not violently, not in a way that announced itself as the abduction it was. A message to her phone, apparently from the compound's administrative office, asking her to report to the external medical station for an urgent consultation. She had responded because the phrasing matched standard compound communication protocol exactly. She had walked out of the compound's east entrance and into a car that was waiting, and by the time she understood what was happening, the door had closed and the compound was behind her. The message reached Kang Jun at 10:22, not a request, not a negotiation, a statement of facts and a single demand. The doctor was in the custody of a third-party organization operating on contracted instruction. The condition for her safe return, Kang Jun was to initiate transfer of operational authority within 48 hours. A formal written transfer, witnessed, documented, irreversible. Upon confirmation of transfer, the doctor would be returned without harm. There was no name attached to the demand. There did not need to be. He set the phone down on his desk with a gentleness that was not composure. It was the opposite of composure. It was the absolute 0 point of a temperature that had not yet decided how to express itself. Min Ho stood 3 feet to his right. 2 other senior personnel were at the far side of the room. No one said anything. The silence in that office was a different kind of silence from the 31 days. That silence had been grief. This silence was something else, something that had a direction. Kang Jun looked at the city through his window for 8 seconds. Then he said, "Everyone out except Min Ho." The room cleared in 11 seconds. The geometry of the situation was this. If he transferred operational authority, the organization would pass to people who had no intention of honoring any agreement about Lena because Lena had been inside these walls long enough to have seen things. In this particular world, people who had seen things were a category with a limited number of outcomes. If he refused and fought the demand directly, the operatives holding her were independent contractors without any loyalty structure that could be leveraged, and the escalation timeline was the one thing he could not control. If he showed the full dimension of what Lena meant to him, the lever Seon Woo had constructed became permanent. An infinite leverage point. The thing that would be used for as long as she was alive and reachable. Every direction caused suffering to someone he was not willing to cause suffering to. Kang Jun had made the most dangerous calculations in the most dangerous situations of his entire professional life without blinking. He stood at that window, and for the first time in 15 years of operational leadership, he did not immediately see the way through. In the room where Lena was sitting, she was doing 2 things simultaneously. She was maintaining the composure that was her most reliable professional tool because she understood with complete professional clarity that composure was the best available advantage in her current situation, and she was thinking with the focused attention of someone who had trained for years in environments where quick, correct assessments could save lives. She assessed the operatives, the room, the door, the timeline she was likely operating within. She thought about the compound and about everything she had come to understand in the past weeks about the man at the center of it. She thought about what he would do when he received the message. She thought about what she knew about him that the people who had taken her did not know. She sat straight. She kept her hands still. She did not look afraid. She was not afraid. She was waiting. Min Ho had been standing quietly for 4 minutes, which in the context of Min Ho's professional operating style was slightly less time than he would normally allow before speaking. He looked at the tablet in his hands. He looked at Kang Jun. He said, "There is something you need to see." Kang Jun looked up. "Before I tell you what Min Ho has on that tablet, I need you to do something right now. Pause this story for 10 seconds. Go to the comments and write what you think Seon Woo is actually hiding. What do you think he has done that goes deeper than the abduction, deeper than the power play, deeper than everything we have already seen? Write your prediction right now. Because what Min Ho is about to show Kang Jun is going to change the entire shape of everything you have been watching." Min Ho crossed to the desk. He placed the tablet on the surface in front of Kang Jun and stepped back without speaking. What Kang Jun was looking at was a communications log, a detailed internal record of message routing, timestamps, personnel IDs, and beside the relevant entries, a delay notation, 37 minutes. Min-ho had been investigating quietly for 3 weeks, running threads through secondary systems that Seon-woo had not known to seal, because no one constructs a perfect architecture in every direction simultaneously. What Min-ho had been able to assemble with the patient, methodical intelligence that was his defining professional quality was this: the message routing delay that night, the 37 minutes between Yeon's collapse and the information reaching Kang Jun, was not an accident of large organization timing. It was a manually inserted delay, a routed pause, a calculated window. The entry was attributed to a personnel ID that Min-ho had traced through 2 layers of administrative structure to a single name. Kang Jun read the record from beginning to end. He read it again. Then he set the tablet down on the desk with a gentleness that was the most frightening thing Min-ho had seen in 15 years of standing beside this man. Not because it was violent, because it was the exact opposite. Because the gentleness of it meant every particle of what Kang Jun was feeling had been gathered up and directed into a single, perfectly controlled point. And that point had a direction. He sat for 12 seconds without speaking. Then he gave Min-ho 3 instructions. 3 instructions, clean, specific, final. Each one containing exactly the words required and none beyond them. Then he stood, adjusted his jacket, and walked out. Min-ho stood in the empty office. He looked at the tablet still open on the desk. He looked at the door. He thought about 31 days and the 37 minutes that had caused them and the man who had engineered both. He thought about Yeon. Then he picked up the tablet, put it under his arm, and followed his boss down the corridor, not to catch up, just to be available. That was what 15 years had taught him. Be available, be close, be ready for whatever the morning produced. What Kang Jun had said to Min-ho in those 3 instructions, and what happened in the hours that followed, was not the kind of thing that needed to be narrated in detail. The compound already knew by the next morning. They knew the way compounds always know things of this nature, not through announcements, but through the quality of the air, through the particular stillness of certain corridors, through the rooms that were occupied yesterday and were being reorganized today. Seon-woo had spent 10 years building toward a specific outcome. He had been patient and methodical and intelligent, and in the end, not quite intelligent enough. There is a limit to how comprehensively you can plan against a man whose only truly unpredictable quality is that he is not, underneath the coldness and the power and the absolute authority, without the capacity to love something. And it is that capacity, the thing Seon-woo had always considered Kang Jun's greatest structural weakness, that turned out to be the thing Seon-woo had most catastrophically failed to account for. When you try to use a man's human heart as a lever, you need to first understand that it can also be used as a source of fuel. Lena was found before dawn. She was returned to the compound in the first light of the morning, unharmed, with the composure she had maintained from the moment the car door closed. She had been waiting. She had known, with the particular quality of knowing that comes from actually understanding someone rather than assuming you understand them, that the waiting would not be long. She walked back into the compound's east entrance and directly to the medical wing. Not because she was required to, because it was hers. Because it was the place she had spent 6 weeks making into something, and she was not prepared to spend a single additional minute anywhere else. She stood in the medical wing, checking her own hands. Steadiness, a clinical habit. She had maintained it through the entire night, and she was maintaining it now. She ran through her standard morning procedures. She checked her equipment. She noted the supply cabinet. She put the professional architecture back in place piece by piece, not because she needed to pretend the night had not happened, but because the architecture was hers and it felt like home and she was choosing to stand in it. She was in the middle of this when she became aware that someone was standing in the doorway. She turned. He was in the doorway. Not summoned, not expected. No clinical reason that could be documented. He was standing in the doorway of her medical wing at 6 in the morning after the longest night this compound had seen in 31 days, and he was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on his face. Not cold, not calculating, not any of the 17 professional configurations of stillness she had cataloged across weeks of shared rooms. This was different. This was the expression that a man who has spent his entire adult life deciding that nothing would reach him wears in the exact moment when something has reached him, and he knows it and does not care anymore about the wall. She looked at him. He looked at her. She said, "You look terrible." He looked at her for one more second. And then Kang Jun laughed. Not a performance, not a decision. A small, involuntary sound that came out of him before any internal protocol could intercept it. Brief, genuine. The laugh of a man who has not laughed in 31 days, hearing the first thing in 31 days that reached past every wall he had built and found the person still alive underneath all of it. He looked almost surprised by it. Lena looked at him the way you look at something you have been told exists, but are seeing for the first time. Like the information becoming real in front of you in a way that the telling of it never fully prepared you for. If you felt that moment the way I felt writing it, then you belong here. That sound, that small involuntary laugh from a man who has not laughed in 31 days, that is what this channel exists to create. Hit subscribe right now. This channel is built for people who feel stories this deeply. I put everything into every single one of these. Be here for the next one. In the corridor outside the medical wing, Min-ho heard it. He had been standing there as he had stood in many corridors over many years, simply available. He heard the small, involuntary sound from inside the room. He recognized it. He closed his eyes. He stood there with his eyes closed for approximately 3 seconds. Then he opened them, turned around, and walked down the corridor in the opposite direction, slowly, not looking back. His face, in those 3 seconds with his eyes closed and nobody watching him, showed everything that 15 years of professional loyalty had never permitted him to show in public. The relief of it, the grief that sat underneath the relief, the deep, unglamorous love of a man for a person he had watched stand at every possible edge and had refused to lose. That expression lasted 3 seconds, and then it was gone, and Min-ho walked away down the corridor, and the morning continued. The morning moved through the compound the way mornings do after long nights. The air was different. Not because anything visible had changed exactly, but because the thing that had been pressurizing every corridor and every conversation and every carefully chosen footstep for 31 days had released, not resolved into anything simple, not disappeared, just released. And the compound breathed in a way it had not breathed since a Tuesday evening when a message was delayed 37 minutes and the world became a different world. If you know someone who needs this story tonight, a friend, a sister, someone who needs to hear about a man who came back to life because of one woman's unguarded moment in an empty corridor, send this video to them right now. Do not wait. Right now. Some stories are meant to travel. Diana arrived at the medical wing at 7:15 for her usual shift. She stood in the corridor outside the door for a moment. She looked through the glass. She saw what was visible through the glass. She did not go inside. She stood there for approximately 10 seconds with an expression that required no translation, and then she put her clipboard under her arm and went to make coffee first. Some things you let breathe. She was very good at knowing which things. Later that afternoon, Lena did her standard supply inventory. She opened each cabinet in sequence, checked each shelf, marked each item. She was thorough, she was methodical, she was composed. She opened the third cabinet from the left. She stopped. On the second shelf, between 2 sets of standard medical supplies, was a file that had not been there that morning. She recognized the format of the folder. She recognized the typeface on the tab. She opened it. It was her file, her employment record, her medical certifications, her security clearance documentation. Everything that constituted her professional existence inside the compound. organized and placed here in this cabinet as if this were where it had always belonged. As if this, the medical wing, was simply where she lived and this was her home and of course her file was here. Inside the folder, loose between 2 pages of her contract, was a single sheet of plain paper. 3 words, handwritten. We do not see the 3 words. The camera holds on Lena's face as she reads them. Her expression moves through 3 things in 5 seconds. The first thing is surprise. A genuine, unguarded, unmanaged surprise that bypasses every professional wall she has ever built. The second thing is something softer and more complicated than surprise, something that has been living quietly in the space below her professional composure for weeks and is now standing up and making itself known. The third thing is a decision. You can see it arrive. You can watch it land in her eyes, the specific quality of light that appears in someone's face at the exact moment they decide to stop managing the distance between themselves and something they want. She folds the paper. She puts it in her coat pocket. She closes the supply cabinet. She breathes. Then she picks up her stethoscope, straightens her coat, and goes back to work. The story is not over. 3 words on a piece of paper are not an ending. They are a beginning that has not yet been spoken aloud. And there is a difference, as anyone who has ever received something that mattered enormously knows, between holding something and acting on it, between the decision that arrives in your eyes and the words that eventually follow it, between the laugh that a man did not plan and the conversation that comes after it once both of them have slept and the sun has come up and the morning requires them to decide whether this is something they are going to acknowledge in the full light of day. That conversation has not happened yet, which means the real story has not happened yet, which means you are going to need to come back. Part 2 is coming. And when I tell you that the 3 words on that paper are going to change every single thing you thought you understood about this story, I am not giving you a preview. I am giving you a promise. Subscribe right now so you are here when it drops. Turn on notifications because part 2 will not wait for you. And if someone you know needs to feel something real tonight, send this to them. The dancing was just the beginning. The freeze was the confession. And what those 3 words mean is the whole story.